and welcome to this Christmas Eve mailbox. And the first one's a Patreon comment talking about seeing Ret POV kills. Now, I will, of course, I don't usually put the Ret stuff in here, but I will, of course, be doing some guidance on Rets for different fights at some point, quite soon, before the end of the year, hopefully. Gives me like 1 week left. But yeah, I used to, with the channel, put kill videos up just as a matter of course. In fact, I first created the YouTube channel specifically for that, just somewhere to upload kill kills. Because what happened, I used to, when I did some videos, I started doing videos in TBC, and the first video I ever did was of our Kel'Thas kill in like Tempest Keep. And I used to upload it somewhere, it wasn't YouTube, somewhere else, I can't remember the name of it even. And eventually, you know, after like tier 7, I stopped playing the game, came back. Where I'd been uploading my videos, they don't keep them there forever. So I thought, okay, and YouTube was, you know, getting bigger by this point, and I thought, okay, well, YouTube sounds like a good place to just put these videos up. And I'd lost quite a few as well, like some of the actual files, video files, I'd actually lost. So there's a number of kills that I don't have anymore. So I thought, a permanent place just to keep them. So I created the YouTube channel for that. So that's where they used to go. But then as I started a couple of years ago doing the channel for other things, the things that I'm doing it for now, it seemed less appropriate to put kill videos up there. I know some people do of their stuff, but it didn't seem to be quite right, especially the way I do them. So I've been doing fewer of them recently. But what I thought to myself is actually a good place to put them would still ironically be YouTube, but just linking onto Patreon. So that's where I'm likely to put the kill videos now. But I will still be, for general YouTube, putting in some videos on my thoughts on how to do it as Ret and stuff like that. The first of which should be coming out quite soon, but it's not done yet. I don't like to say, oh, it'll be coming out at a certain point, especially over Christmas, when, even though it's a break for me, there's still things to do, and I've still got to go. I haven't done any visiting yet. I will be doing visiting quite soon as well for people. So, okay, so on to the YouTube comments. This first one, I quit the game. I played my Dwarf Priest since Vanilla. Of course, very powerful in Vanilla because of the Fee Award they used to get. That was their racial ability. Priests used to get a racial ability. Not just the normal racials that everyone else got. A specific ability for priests, depending on your race. And the dwarf one was a Fee Award, which was fairly useful. Although in most situations, like if it was a Dragon Fee or something like that, warrior tanks could actually stand stance to deal with that. But it was still a very handy thing to have. But it says, but the Dwarven racial is so bad for casters. Why use Stone Form in PvE? Physical damage reduction, blah, blah, blah. It says, damage increase or more HP or a damage proc with healing. Now, as a dwarf, you have to be a tank. All the classes... And so it goes on a little bit. And I think this, you know, is a good point in a way, the fact that the racial abilities are basically leading you towards, you know, this race should be this sort of role. Now, in general, if you're going to have racials at all, now I'm not in favour at all of racials that have gameplay uses, because then it means you're going to have people deciding their race based on those instead of based on what they want to play. But if you're going to have them, I'm okay with the concept of having racials that sort of encourage you to play it within role-playing bounds, because, you know, in any sort of role-playing system, in any game, role-playing game, there's always races that are more likely to be certain classes than others, even if you're allowed a wider field. And so pushing you in that direction is sort of okay. But then you ask yourself, so is the racial all that useful for a priest? Generally speaking, not. I'm not saying that it's useless, but is it very useful? Not really. But then you think to yourself, well, is it because dwarf priests don't really make a lot of sense? Like dwarf mages, you could argue, don't make a terrible amount of sense. Would it matter if the dwarf racial wasn't that great for a mage? Not really, because although it's allowed, should you really have dwarf mages? Whereas dwarf priests, there's no issue with that at all. It actually makes total sense, dwarf priests. And, you know, in the game World of Warcraft, that has never been a thing of, ooh, should you really have dwarf priests? So I sort of agree that sometimes the racials, you should sort of think about how useful it is for different ones. But for me personally, I would just rather get rid of the overall the gameplay racials completely. I would put in just cosmetic ones. Like dwarfs used to have a racial where they could see treasure chests, because there used to be chests in vanilla. You know, as an exploration thing, and they used to show up on a mini map for dwarfs. They had an ability that was one of their racial abilities. I mean, you could have that now because treasure chests have come back into the game since WoD, really. So you could have that again. There's all sorts of cosmetic ones that I think would be fine. But where you're making a decision to play a particular race, and then worse still, a particular faction, you know, it can't be... you can't fail to notice, if you're looking, for example, at the world's top guilds, the vast majority of them are Horde. You know, I was, when the top 5 had already been completed, I was musing on Twitter, okay, when are we going to get the first Alliance guild killed in Mythic? And I directed that towards one of the officers in Scrubbusters, at which point, yeah, they actually killed it quite soon after that comment. And I hope I was Takeshi, I hope he was joking, but then he was musing, okay, which server should we roll on if we want to go Horde? And I'm thinking, are they? I don't even know if they're serious, I was joking or not. But if they went Horde, then there's hardly anyone left. There'd be like one guild left in the current top 10 that'd be Alliance. And that's awful. That's absolutely terrible. And racials are a big part of that. So yeah, I certainly don't like the idea of racials making a decision on someone, which faction to play is actually worst of all, but even which class. If the class race combination makes sense in the lore, then you shouldn't be discouraged because the racials are not very good. I mean, some racials are pretty good for everyone, like the Pandaren racial, you know, the extra benefit from buff food. I mean, that suits everyone pretty well. The same for human racials. You know, they're pretty good as well. Didn't always used to be. Back when weapon skill was a thing, different races had different benefits to certain weapons. So the human racial, for example, you had a bonus with swords and maces. So as a paladin, you'd want... I mean, as a paladin, you would argue you'd sort of want swords and maces more than axes anyway, or polearms. But it certainly meant if you took an axe or a polearm, it had to be... Well, the racial did change a little bit, but it had to be significantly better than your sword or mace in many cases. So, especially against raid bosses. But then again, the style of swords and maces was more suited anyway. So that, you know, that wasn't too bad. But yeah, the fact, you know, certain weapons. So obviously, if you got a bonus, like dwarfs, I think got. Am I getting this wrong? I don't think I am. Dwarfs got a bonus to using guns. So obviously, as a dwarf hunter, you probably want to use a gun. You know, it's things like that. So you should really, I think, decide your race based on cosmetic reasons, as long as it makes sense in the lore. Don't think of this as me saying, yeah, gnome paladin should be a thing. Don't be ridiculous. No. If it makes sense in the lore, and it's an allowed thing in the game, then you should just be able to choose it on cosmetic reasons, is my view. Anyway, rambling on. Next one is another favourite topic of mine, player housing. So, on the topic of player housing, I'm always surprised no one even references DC Universe Online. Probably my favourite player housing, they call them lairs. It was nothing more than a cosmetic thing for the longest time. You got drops from world mobs, dungeon bosses that were unique items you could place in your lair anywhere you wanted. There were a dozen lairs you could choose from, and you could place them anywhere in the world. Simply the best. That actually does sound quite good. Possibly the fact that no one really references DC Universe Online, I don't know. I haven't played it. And it might well be that an awful lot of people haven't played it. I don't know how popular it was in the end. I'm aware of it, so it must have been popular enough for me to have been aware of it, but I was never really tempted to play it. But yeah, that concept of player housing does seem fine. Although you say it was nothing more than a cosmetic thing for the longest time, sort of suggesting that it had non-cosmetic things in at some point. Now, it depends on what they are, because like in Lord of the Rings Online, for example, which is a player housing system, again, I quite like. It could be better, don't get me wrong, but I quite like it. It has some utility, but very little. Like recently, with the Mordor expansion, you got a thing you could put in that was like a portal to Mordor. And that sort of thing is not a problem. The main problem is when you have player housing that's got things in it that will make you want to go to the house to use the thing. That's where it's bad. Obviously, you're not going to go to the house to use the portal as you'd maybe portal to your house and then use the portal in there to get somewhere else. You're not staying in the house for hours on end to use this thing, because that's where you've got a problem with player housing. But certainly when it's largely cosmetic, because and people think, well, if you're not going to spend much, because here's the argument: people say, well, with player housing, that means people are going to be in their houses. They're not out in like Dalaran or Stormwind or Orgrimmar or wherever the hub is. And that's a downside. And that would be a downside if that was true. So then you say, so we don't want player housing that's going to keep you in your house for a long time. So then other people say, well, what is the point of the house then? The point of the house is it's a way to be creative. Okay? So you have the house and it's just cosmetic and you get to furnish it. Okay? Like Elder Scrolls Online has the most advanced player housing I have seen. All right? Personally. Because you can place things anywhere you want. I mean, I got a throne and I stuck it on the beach of the like tropical island I bought in Elder Scrolls Online. You know, so but I've seen what some people have done with the ESO. Like I've just bought the basic houses and some basic furnishing and I haven't done anything with it really. But some people have, and they've acquired these things from lots of different sources. You know, they've just gone round into the world, the solo world stuff. The stuff that Blizzard say they want us doing all the time, going out into the world, well, that's a fantastic way to do it. You know, there's some stuff that can be crafted. There's some stuff that's super limited edition. Like, there's some stuff I know is available right now because of the Christmas event that won't be available after it. All right? And it's new stuff this year. It's not the stuff that was available last year. And then next year it'll be some different stuff. Sometimes you get a weekend where there's something available if you go and do this thing. It won't be available after that. You can get, you know, there's various ways you can get it, doing content and stuff like that. And you can build up an absolutely fantastic scene. And then what do you do with it when you've created it? Do what anyone else does who does anything creative. You show other people. That's what it's for. You know, it's player housing, and on the best level, I think, is the equivalent of someone doing fan art or cosplay. You know, you've done the thing, and then you show other people, and you get to see what they think about it. So it's not going to keep you in the place forever. In fact, in order to do all the stuff with the house, to build, you know, to make it all look really nice, you've got to go out. You've got to go out there and go and get the stuff that you need. But that's my view anyway. But yeah, this system certainly does look exactly what you would want. It's cosmetic. You get drops from world mobs and dungeon bosses that were unique items you could place in your lair anywhere you wanted, which is a really key thing. Couldn't really do that in Lord of the Rings Online. It says there were a dozen lairs you could choose from, so obviously having a lot of choice and place them anywhere in the world. That sounds pretty good as well. I'm not saying I would expect that in a WoW player housing system, but that would be pretty good. Next comment, also on player housing, it says, speaking of player housing, I think one of the issues is that Blizzard isn't really an RPG studio. What Blizzard, in my opinion, have always excelled at above all, two things: systems, mechanics, balance, and interface. That's really four things. Putting a slash in between some of them doesn't make it one thing. But I know what you mean. Systems, mechanics, balance, and the interface. The games have great replayability because of their balancing, etc., and they feel good to play. And just like their storytelling is pretty basic, and their universe is really a patchwork of various mythologies, I don't think WoW is really about role-playing. I mean, of course, you can role-play, but like you mentioned, with the limited transmog options, Blizz doesn't really help you do a lot in that regard. I can sort of see where you're coming from on that, because they don't, do they? They don't do a lot of the things that allow for effective role-play in World of Warcraft. But I find it strange to think, like, certainly I would think the original developers of the game, I can't imagine that they wouldn't have seen themselves as an RPG studio, because I know that they've all talked about playing Dungeons and Dragons and still do, some of them. Now, I don't know so much about the newer crop, okay, the people that are currently in charge of it in terms of what they've done with that. But when the people who originally came up with the game have a strong background, I mean, if you play Dungeons and Dragons, that's full-on roleplay, full-on. And to do that and then make your own game, I don't think they would ever have consciously said, no, we're not doing this as a full-on role-playing game. Because if you've really got into Dungeons and Dragons, I'll tell you this, and you get your chance to make your own fantasy RPG, you are going to want to put a lot of that stuff in. So I think there were probably other reasons. I mean, player housing was actually, I don't want to say promise, that might be a bit strong, but they were sort of saying that player housing would come in the game. It sort of was promised, if we're honest. It kept getting put back. I think it was like, you know, and I've got some sympathy for this because I have the same situation when doing videos. Like, I always have a massive list of videos I want to do. Most of them, more than 50% of the videos I want to do, never get done because by the time I can get round to them, there's not enough time because, you know, it's really, you know, the limited time around work and everything like that and raiding. But you have a priority system. So you have a video you want to do and then something, you have another idea and you have to decide where in the priority it comes. And with player housing, it was obviously quite low. And eventually they just abandoned it completely. But for several years, they were still, you know, player housing's going to come, it's going to come, it's going to come. And then it just didn't. So they must have their reasons for that. Just like they must have their reasons for really having a severely limited transmog system. But they did bring it in. You know, they brought the transmog system in. They didn't have to do that. But they did. So I do think they see themselves as an RPG studio. Whether we agree is another matter, because I think I agree with you that when you compare with other ones, it's very limited. And certainly from my point of view, can't speak for other people, I think a lot of the limitations they put in are totally unnecessary. Completely unnecessary. Next one. From a friend of mine. The more balanced items and classes are, the less individual or interesting they must become. It's kind of a Heisenberg uncertainty principle deal. The more of one, the less of the other. The only way around it would be to have balance in power and only variety in utility. Sorry, my voice. This is unfortunately true. It is, isn't it? It's like, you know, this is secondary stats ultimately is the focus of this one. So the problem is, of course, we have our primary stat, and that's easy because you have one primary stat, it's either strength, agility, or intellect, and it does what it does. But then you have your secondary stats. Then the issue is that secondary stats are interesting by their definition. When something's interesting, in other words, it has an effect on parts of our gameplay, then increasing or decreasing it changes the gameplay significantly. For me, for example, as a Ret Paladin, haste has a very obvious effect because my main resource is actually time as a Retribution Paladin. We have Holy Power, but our main resource is time. In other words, the builders that we need to be able to spend that Holy Power have a cooldown, and we have to wait for that cooldown to come up. So it's not a resource like energy, like rogues and feral druids and monks get energy, for example, that they have to use to build up that secondary resource, and warriors have rage, and we have time. And so when you increase your haste, you reduce that time. So changing your haste significantly affects that. Which is why, I mean, I got a trinket that some people would probably quite like, which was an 975 Chrono Shard from my weekly cache this week. So what that does, for those who don't know, is it gives you, it's like a proc, but the proc is a load of haste. Now, I would quite like more haste. The problem is that it's a random proc, so it will just come up every now and then. I'll suddenly get a load more haste, which sounds fantastic, but I don't like that. It's jarring for me, for my haste to be changing like that, because it affects, you know, my muscle memory. I'm fine. I know my haste increases during heroism, and I know it increases during crusade, but I track those things, and then also, it's not just that I track them. I could track the proc on the trinket. It's the fact that I know when they're coming. I activate crusade, so I know when that's going to happen, and I know when heroism is going to come in because it's coordinated. Unless you're in a pug, but you know what the hell with a pug. And so yeah, so I don't like. And there's other classes as well that might have a similar thing. But then there's another issue, which is that some secondary stats, as a result, for some classes or some specs, will just be really powerful, and you want loads and loads of them. And some of them are really weak. And the problem then is, if the gear you get is poorly itemized. Now, I mean, I would say that quite a few of the pieces I'm wearing at the moment are not well itemized. But for me, that's not as big a problem as it would be for, say, a Shadow Priest, someone like that. Because all my stats are actually pretty good. They're all pretty close together in terms of value. Some, it just sneaks a little ahead. Not much. All of them are pretty close together. For some specs, that's not the case. So for some specs where they really need 1 or 2 secondary stats and the other 2 are basically useless, then having poorly itemized gear is a massive problem for them. So the way you deal with it, it's simple, isn't it? You don't have lots of these stats. You just have your primary stat and your secondary stat, which does a thing. Let's say you have strength and haste, or intellect and haste, or something like that. That would make it look simpler. But as we say here, it would also make it less interesting, because this is the real problem. And it is something I think that Blizzard have shied away from. Other games, like I noticed Star Wars: The Old Republic, again, very shaky because I only have, I've had huge gaps between periods of playing it. But I'm pretty sure they did consolidate stats in that one. So they're a bit more basic now. But as a result, potentially a bit less interesting. Whereas with Blizzard, they've come up with so many stats as well. The secondary stats we have now are not as they've always been. They've tried other things as well. We had armor penetration at one point. We had multi-strike, and that only lasted for like 1 expansion. So they have tried, and we used to have like, hit and expertise and spell penetration and stuff like that. And, they've tried various different secondary stats, and some of them have had to fall by the wayside, but they still maintain that we need a certain number of stats for the purpose of interest. And if there is sometimes a cost in gear balancing, then potentially it costs to come at that. The argument against that really is that Blizzard, again, sometimes are presented with a solution and for whatever reason don't like it that could help. And we all know what solution would help this situation where poorly itemized gearing can cause a problem for you. Because everyone focuses on item level, don't they? Of, getting yourself into a poor item level must be above this item level, which is always and my first experience of this, by the way, was of course, like I suppose a lot of people's, in Wrath of the Lich King gear score. But the thing is, I wasn't playing. Like, I stopped playing after the first tier of Wrath. Stopped playing the game. Went off. Didn't like it. Went off somewhere else. So when I came back, gear score was already embedded. So I wasn't there when it was coming in, when someone came up with this stupid idea of gear score. But I saw the effects of it, because I remember getting into, coming back. I only came back on a casual basis, but coming back in, and I remember distinctly a particular ICC puck, 25-man ICC puck. And I was, what was I on? I think I was a Death Knight at the time. I rolled a few characters at that point, because again, playing casual. So I was on a Death Knight, and there was a Retribution Paladin. Now, of course, as a former Retribution Paladin at the time, the reason I went Death Knight, actually, first of all, just because I knew I could level up really quickly, because it was Horde as well. So I went to join a Friends Guild, Horde. And I didn't want to transfer my Alliance Paladin and turn it into a dirty Horde. So what I did is I just created new characters. I was going to play casually anyway. Created a Death Knight first, because that's quicker to level up, because you start at level 50-something, 7. Something like that. No, that doesn't sound right. 55. And so it's a lot quicker. But, I then also leveled a Paladin while I was doing stuff on that. Doesn't matter. So I looked at this Rep Paladin, and I could see what he was doing. He was fiddling the gear score system, because he had the most unsuitable gear you can imagine. He had totally unsuitable gear. He was not going to be able to do very good damage with the gear he was wearing. But what he was wearing was his highest gear score, what we would call now item level pieces, to fiddle the system. So that someone could use the add-on and go, oh, that's plenty good gear score, yeah, we'll take him. It'd do, like, rubbish damage, because he wasn't wearing anything decent. And it's the same thing now with item level. So people in a pug, if a pug is going to say we want, I don't know, whatever, 930 say, and someone's got 928, but it's 928 equipped, but it's like 932. Obviously, they're going to swap in some pieces to get themselves over that 930, even though it's going to make them less effective. And so this is the problem with, the fact that item level only tells part of the picture. So we need these secondary stats. Why not bring in reforging again? Blizzard's arguments. First of all, their arguments keep changing, which is not helpful at all. It's okay adding arguments, by the way, but when you just completely change your argument, that's just a bit like, you're not really telling us the real reason, are you? You're just saying whatever seems convenient at the time. But, you know, seriously, what is the reason? Because they haven't managed to do what they wanted to do. They've tried, they've improved, but they haven't still managed to make item level an effective barometer of the quality of a piece of gear. And it's all right us saying sim it. We can sim it. The vast majority of players are just playing in the game. They don't look at guides. They don't look at like discords or community areas or anything like that. There isn't even anyone telling them to sim it, let alone showing them how. So they're going on item level. So the way I would look at it is this. So for when people, and you see this all the time, when people are in LFR or something like that, something where you're going to have a lot of people that don't really know what they're doing, and people are moaning that there's not enough damage being done at the bottom end of the damage meters, well, ask yourself this. What is Blizzard doing to help those players? Because the answer seems to be not a lot. And I think with secondary stats, there is this issue of if you want to keep interest, you do have to pay a price. But I don't think we should have to pay unnecessary price. You know, the lack of reforging to me is just like an unnecessary tax on the price we're paying for having a significant number of secondary stats. Next one. It says, I had to disagree that leveling wasn't a focus in vanilla. There was far more storytelling. Most of the world space places to explore was dedicated to the leveling experience, as were most of the dungeons. By pretty much any metric, most of the game's content was made to be experienced while leveling. So first comment. Well, first of all, not quite. First of all, you're saying disagreeing as if I don't think leveling was an important part of the game. Leveling, of course, was not a focus. I'm still going to stand by that. Because what is the purpose of leveling? To get to the next level. What is the ultimate purpose of leveling? To get to the point where you can't get any more levels. Therefore, to get to endgame. To say that there was far more storytelling, and that was a really good thing. Because what I always say leveling is I always say it's an advanced tutorial. And I still hold that view. And what it's tutoring you in is, first of all, the world. You need to experience the world. Okay? So that means lots of exploration. Vanilla storytelling was really good for that. The questing was excellent for that. It also needs to teach you about key characters, key figures in the game. It did that. It needs to show you how to play the game. It did that effectively because it gave you abilities every so often just to add to your toolkit so you could learn how to use them rather than get a whole mass at once, unfortunately, which is what happens, for example, with like Death Knights and Demon Hunters because of the hero class thing. Even though, you know, you still get them portioned out. You get them portioned out so quickly, you don't really have time to get on top of them all. When you're doing it through a leveling process, that's much better. So that was really good as well. But and also how to sort of behave and do the etiquette of the game as well. Because you've got dungeons and other things that needed groups, while you're leveling up, you sort of learn how to behave. Because, you know, there's certain things I changed my view on, for example, just by being part of a society. So when I was leveling up, I was an enchanter. I was an enchanter tailor, which might sound strange as a paladin, but it made total sense. Because enchanting for me sounded like the most interesting. And what goes well with enchanting? Well, tailoring, because tailoring, you can make stuff that you can then disenchant. And the stuff you need to make it with, you don't need another profession to get the raw materials because you just killed humanoids. So what I observed in dungeons, remember one of the first dungeons I would have done, if not the first, was Dead Mines. So in Dead Mines, every now and then, well, it's a mine, so you've got mining nodes. And what would happen is, and this was fairly typical throughout my vanilla experience, is any miners in the group would roll to see who got to use that node. It'd be like, well, we'll roll for this. And it wasn't like, you know, a miner would... Sometimes one miner would tap it but not take the stuff just to get the skill point, and the other one, whoever won the roll, would then tap it. You know, take the thing out. But they never used to roll for the rest of us so that we could have the stuff. It was always like the miner, whoever won the roll, would get all the copper or tin or whatever it was. So I applied that same thing to enchanting and thought to myself, well, surely I should get all the greens that no one wants to equip because that's my resource for my profession. That's not how it works. You know, you needed or greeded. Before the need-greed roll... Actually, what roll came in first of all? In parties. Was there even a roll? There was a roll. It was just a straightforward need... Was it in... No, it was just a roll pass, and then it became a need greed pass roll, didn't it? Yeah. But anyway, So that was expected there. So I thought that was very strange, that people expected to be able to have greens even though they didn't want to equip them, when I saw that as the equivalent of a tin node for a miner and stuff like that. But eventually you sort of, you know, as you level up, you understand what are the unwritten rules of the community, and you realise, okay, so this is how it actually works. Okay, fine. And it's for that, it does that as well. But the point is, it's by pretty much any metric, most of the game's content was made to experience raw leveling. No, it wasn't. Because all of the content that was done after it was released, virtually none of it was for leveling. They added some things to zones. But most of the stuff they were doing was creating the raids and creating the dungeons for level cap and creating the other content for level cap, you know, for high level. So it wasn't at all, you know, the leveling purpose, which was good in itself. But the thing is, if what you're saying is true, then that would mean the vast majority of players would have leveled to 60 and then immediately started another class and leveled to 60 and then immediately started another one leveled to 60. That's not what happened. You had an awful lot of people who never got to level cap at all, fair enough. But you didn't have that by and large, or I've certainly never heard of a huge community of players that do just that, get to level 60 and then stop and then go back to level 1 on another class and do the same thing. So I don't think there was a very significant number of people doing that. There may have, I'm not saying there was nobody who saw just the leveling, because I can understand that point of view. So I'm playing Star Wars The Old Republic myself at the moment. And I'm just doing it for the leveling game part of it. I'm not interested in the end game at the end of it, which I gather is not that great anyway. So, you know, when I get to various points on certain classes, I'm just going to do other classes. I've already, you know, I'm trying to level up several classes at once anyway. And that's the way I'm going to view it. But I don't see there was a significant number of people that were doing that in vanilla, because I'd never heard of it. There was certainly wasn't. If there was a large enough community of people doing that, it would have appeared somewhere on a forum. But yeah, so the leveling in a game is the whole focus is end game. The majority of the time spent, even on vanilla, that had, you know, far more zones than any expansion could possibly have, and therefore more content there. Once the game was out, I mean, obviously it was several years to develop. Once the game was out, the majority of the efforts were spent on developing that end game content, and of course the next expansion a bit later. And then the second comment, I think you've completely misunderstood this. It says, also, Paladins were the best solo class in the game in vanilla, saying, I soloed it on my Paladin, made me laugh instantly. As if I was saying, oh yeah, because I soloed it on my Paladin, it was easy. No, that's not what I was saying. Someone basically made the comment that Hogger was impossible to solo, unless you were loads of levels above it. Well, it wasn't, because I did it. So, yeah. Simple as that. And it's not just a case that Paladins were the best solo class in the game in vanilla. Paladins are the best solo class in the game in any expansion. Simple as that. I was able to solo the group quest. It was very slow going, don't get me wrong. Slow going to do anything as a Paladin in vanilla. But it was like the tortoise and the hare. You got there, Need. So, so you could actually go into the areas, because you used to have like group quests for like where you'd have areas of elites and stuff like that. As long as you were careful and cunning and pulled things into safe areas out of patrolways, because it would take you a long time to gun them down, basically. But you would do it. You wouldn't die if you were careful. So yeah, our Paladins are absolutely the best solo class, but they've always been the best solo class. Always. Next one, it says, a small change to gear that would make it a little less frustrating, for me at least, would be having 3 stats on every piece of gear rather than 2, but with the same stat budget. It would result in less gear being poor or more gear being decent for more specs. This is assuming versatility isn't just scrapped, which would also help. No, I don't think versatility has been... I'll tell you a use for versatility in a minute if it's... but I think versatility is a useful stat. But anyway, I don't necessarily think this would help, because it goes back to the making things less interesting. Like, you could go down the rabbit, completely and just say, well, let's just have all 4 stats on every piece of gear and all the same stat budget. In which case, no point in having all those stats really at all. The interest part of it comes from the fact that there is a wide variety of gear. Also, Blizzard need there to be a wide variety of gear, because they want... This is why Titan Forging came in, remember. Titan Forging is not there to get people excited about LFR loot. It's there so that we keep farming. It's for the replayability of content. That's what it exists for, replayability, so that we always think we can get an upgrade there. If they reduce the pool of items on loot tables effectively, or the pool of items that different classes and specs would want for their slot, it works against that principle, really. So they don't want massive loot tables, because you used to have fairly large loot tables. I don't think they want to go back to the massive loot tables, because then people are waiting even for the... I think they think Titan Forging is just a better way, because the items, few items drop off each boss, but the Titan Forging gives them effectively a much greater range of stuff they can drop, is the way that works. But putting 3 stats on each one would significantly reduce the variety of gear. And with the same stat budget as well, again, that works against that. So they would not do that. And I don't think it would help either. I don't think a lot of people would be in favour of that. Because, yeah, at that point, you might as well just say, well, just condense it down into one secondary stat called Mastery and leave it at that. So yeah, about versatility as well. Versatility is actually quite a good stat. I know it's a boring stat, but it doesn't stop it being a good stat. Because think about what versatility has been useful for in Legion. Vantus runes. So Vantus runes have been actually quite a good addition, because it allows you to go, okay, this is the boss we're progressing on this week. Either, you know, the damage on it is fairly severe, or there's tight DPS checks. We'll use a Vantus rune on it, give everyone an extra, what is it, 1500 versatility or something. Versatility, of course, giving us extra damage and a damage reduction, helps either way. So it doesn't matter whether what we're struggling with is people taking a little bit too much damage or not quite doing enough damage to certain mobs or bosses. Versatility helps you in both cases. So having this Vantus rune thing is fantastic. Now, granted, you could sort of follow this on and say, okay, well, maybe we just have versatility that exists as a stat that's not on gear, only with the Vantus rune. You could, and that would serve that purpose. But it's not a bad stat in terms of what it does, because it's always useful. That's the thing, it is always useful. You're not having to worry about breakpoints or anything like that with versatility. It will always, just getting extra versatility will always give you a bit more damage and a bit less damage taken. And sure, it might not, for some classes and specs, sim very well. Maybe you're disappointed when you get it just because it's a poorly simming stat. But that's just because you've got other stats that are then, because it's like fixed, it's almost fixed versatility in terms of its usefulness. Because it's so uninteresting, its value is totally fixed. So if it sims very low for you, it either means you've got loads of it, or it means that for your spec, there are other secondary stats that are just way more powerful. Well, that probably means they're way too powerful. So maybe that's a balancing issue, that maybe you know, haste or crit or something like that has too much benefits to you. I mean, crit in particular used to be a thing for warriors, isn't it? DPS warriors. They used to go mad for it, because at the start of an expansion they'd be totally useless. Then at the end of expansion, when they had massive amounts of crit, they were gods. I think that seems to have been knocked on the head now. They seem to have solved that problem. Anyway, last one. It says, how, this is going back to vanilla reminiscing. How awesome was it when you got your very first shoulder slot item when around level 15 to 20 in vanilla? One of my favourite moments for some reason. I can relate to the idea of there were certainly key moments in vanilla that I remember very clearly. And again, this goes back to, you know, what is it about vanilla people? Some people just like the vanilla game, so straight, let's just put that to one side. People just did like it, and they would still like to be playing that now. But I think for a lot of people, it's like, you know, remembering your first Doctor when you're watching Doctor Who for the first time. You remember these things because it's all very new, and now it's not so new. But I remember an awful lot of things. I remember exactly where I was when I hit level 40. Exactly where I was. I don't remember where I was when I hit level 110. When it went live. But here's what's interesting. I remember where I was when I hit level 110 on the alpha when I first leveled a character to when you first could level a character to 110. I remember exactly where I was then. Don't remember where I was when it went live on any character. But I remember when I hit level 40 where I was. Although I don't remember where I was when I hit level 60, oddly enough. I don't remember getting my first set of shoulders though. That is one I don't remember. I do remember my first helm. I don't remember where I got it from. I remember it because I couldn't fail to notice it because at that time, they've sort of changed it a bit now, but at that time, paladins and warriors used mail up to level 40 and then you used plate. And the current mail users, like hunters and shamans, they used leather up to level 40, then they used mail. So the way it looked pre-level 40 mail was very much warrior look. Because that's what it's designed for, warriors and paladins. And I remember the helms, because the helms were always the same, basically. There were those things with the horns. They were just different recolours of the same things. Like the green iron helm is, I think, a classic example, because I think that's a male. Or it was. It may be different now, because paladins and warriors now use plate right from the start. Which is probably what they should have done from the start. I can understand why they did the thing, because it's like you growing into your character, your coming of age type thing. Which is not a bad idea, but it makes a lot of sense just to have the same armour type all the way through, I think. It just gets confusing for people otherwise. Plus, of course, when transmog came in, that made a big problem, didn't it? Because you might have had some transmog that you really liked pre-level 40, but it was male now. You can't transmog that onto plate because of the transmog rules. So, you know, that had to change as well. But no, I remember several things very, very distinctly. And I know that memory can play tricks on you, but there are certain things I remember very, very keenly. And I have more memories of vanilla than I do any other expansion in terms of like key points, which is weird because that's longer ago. But getting my first shoulders, no, is not one of them. And it should be, shouldn't it, really? Because I strongly suspect my first set of shoulders were probably bought from a vendor. Because I did used to, before I knew better, buy gear from the vendors in like Stormwind when it was just white quality crap. When I didn't have a proper appreciation for stats at the time. So I would just, oh, they've got a weapon, it's better DPS than mine, I will get that. Which for a weapon actually probably would have made sense. But I used to do it for gear as well. Oh, it's for this level. Oh, that's better than the level I've got. I'll replace my green quality stuff with stats on it with this white quality thing because it's for a higher level. Is, I think, what I did. So I probably got my first shoulders just buying it from a vendor, and maybe that's why it doesn't seem that interesting. But I could be wrong, but I cannot remember at all. Cannot remember when or where or how I got my first shoulders. But it is funny what you remember anyway. Anyway, that's the end of the mailbox for today. Thanks very much for listening. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share with other people. Have a very happy Christmas, and I'll be back on with something in a couple of days. See you later.